There is no arguing that spanking is a hot-button topic in society today. These days, all one has to do is turn on a television and you will most likely hear some form of controversy in regards to spanking. An example of this currently is Adrian Peterson, the football player that has been indicted on charges of child abuse, which he has until recently defended and said his actions are nothing more than an effective form of punishment. Whether for or against spanking, both parents and non-parents alike have an opinion in regards to spanking, and whether spanking is an effective form of punishment or an ineffective form of abuse. Over the years, there has been a great deal of research done. Empirical evidence both supports and refutes whether or not spanking has negative long-term effects among children. For this presentation, I will focus on spanking and the effect it can have or not have on children. I have found a common response when discussing spanking, and that is my parents, my grandparents, my teachers, etc. spanked me, and I turned out okay. These statistics seen here support these beliefs. Many studies and research has been done regarding spanking in the U.S. and other countries. Much evidence comes to the same conclusion. The effects of spanking are negative. One large study done by Strauss and Meridian examined spanking, which they refer to as corporal punishment, and how it correlates with antisocial behavior and impulsiveness in children. It also focused on impulsive corporal punishment, and if impulsivity of the mother had a greater effect on the child's antisocial behavior and impulsivity. The study found that both corporal punishment and impulsive corporal punishment had a relation to child behavioral problems, with impulsivity corporal punishment being a stronger risk factor. Gershoff also focused on the negative effects of spanking. She found, based on increasing research, that spanking is ineffective, related to an increase of aggression in children, and it's also associated with several harmful side effects, such as increased mental health issues in children, which follows them through adulthood, bad behavior, and damaging relationships between parent and child. Gershoff also addresses spanking as being a human rights issue, and she notes that a large number of professional organisms recommended into spanking, as you see here in this slide. The National Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Humane Society, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Association of Pediatric Nurse Practitioners, the National Association of Social Work. All have come out with the recommendation to no longer spank your children. Bradley and others also conducted a study, and they examined factors of a child's home environment that prior research has shown to be linked with the child's overall well-being and that could potentially cause differences in behavioral development. One of the aspects observed was a relationship between spanking and behavioral problems. The findings are consistent with prior research and theory. Bradley and others gave an example of spanking and how the amount of spanking was associated with the number of behavioral problems in youth. He also notes these behavior problems increase with age. Alternatively, Larzerly and Kuhn reviewed 26 studies on childhood outcomes of physical punishment, and they discussed the two major viewpoints that are relevant today, both unconditional anti-spanking and conditional spanking. In this study, they concluded that childhood outcomes of physical discipline depend on how it was applied, and negative long-term effects formally related with any type of physical punishment are not exclusive to physical punishment. They also go on to refute much of the previous research which suggests just corporal punishment has detrimental long-term side effects on children, and there is much more involved in the detrimental side effects. Based on all of the research I have discussed thus far, acceptance and the use of corporal punishment in the United States should be cause for concern. This needs to be addressed both socially and culturally. I propose, first, educate. Address the cycle of violence. Parents who were spanked as children are more likely to spank their children, according to the text. The textbook also states that 72% of adults believe it is okay to spank a child. The question that needs to be asked is why? Why do parents feel this way? Try to understand the why. In understanding the why, we can maybe come up with a solution. Also, make parents aware of all the professional organizations that are against spanking, as I previously discussed in the presentation. And teach parents the importance of the social learning theory and how modeling and reinforcing, as discussed in the textbook, is an effective way of parenting and punishment. Explain how these studies show that a child's behavior is learned by observing and imitating others. What should this tell us about spanking? This tells us that the aggression can be viewed as acceptable to a child. The text goes on to discuss how modeling is most influential in the early years of child development. Furthermore, we should teach other effective ways to discipline children. The textbook discusses two of these ways that have been known to be effective: timeouts and taking away of privileges. And it is equally important for caregivers to recognize ways to increase effectiveness in punishment. The text explains ways in which to accomplish this. There is consistency with the punishment, that giving child explanations as to the reason for the punishment can be effective, and also work towards a warm relationship between a parent and a child, because ultimately most children just want to please their parents. Next, inform parents of the many countries that have banned all forms of physical punishment, including in the home. This map illustrates over 30 countries that have a law against corporal punishment. Make them aware as to why all of these developed countries have enacted this law. Second, provide a clear, law-abiding definition of spanking, no matter where you live in the U.S. Currently, all 50 states allow reasonable punishment. What is defined as reasonable? This is too vague and open for interpretation. It is important to provide this because reasonable can have a different meaning cross-culturally. An example of this is when Brady discussed how African Americans define physical punishment differently than other populations. The football player I discussed earlier is a prime example of the blurred lines of gray when using physical force to discipline a child. Be specific in this definition and what is defined as spanking and what is defined as child abuse, and enforce the laws and punish the individuals who cross that line. Third, corporal punishment should be banned in every school, in every county, in every state, nationwide. Currently, there are still 19 states that allow corporal punishment in our schools, as you can see in this slide. And most of these states are in the South. This drives home the point that spanking is an acceptable form of punishment. How can we as a society come together and explain to parents the harm spanking children can cause if we still allow it in our schools? I believe this to be a first step in reducing physical punishment. Lastly, support one another as mothers, fathers, and caregivers. Be open-minded. Understand that we all come from different places, backgrounds, and perspectives. And try to understand. And with understanding might come change. As I have discussed throughout this presentation, there is so much mounting evidence that supports the belief that spanking has a negative long-term effect on children. We as a society should and need to listen to this. Be open-minded to education. Be open-minded to change. Create new laws nationwide that clarify what spanking is and what abuse is. And ultimately, really consider the well-being of our children and how spanking can have negative long-term effects on a child's behavior, well-being, aggression, impulsiveness, increased mental health, and much more. We as a society can make this better.